Welcome to the Human Impact Theory podcast. I'm Jacqueline Way, founder of 365 Give and your host. Welcome to my home. I'm so happy you're here today because we're going to clear up something that affects all of our lives, the lives of everyone around you. And some even say it's the greatest global pandemic of our time, mental health. In Canada, May signifies Mental Health Month. But this conversation is bigger than one country. Mental health knows no borders, and neither do we. My guest today is someone you need to learn from. First of all, I'm Canadian, and she's American. We want everyone to see that no matter what happens between our countries and our leaders, that it doesn't have to create a separation between us. We can stay connected, and this is such a big piece of our mental health. As a Canadian, I consider Americans our friends, our partners, and our allies, and I hope this will never change. So today, I want you to meet my great friend. She's the advisor for 365 Give and one of the most brilliant women I know, Dr. Rowshanak Hashemiyoon. Now, just listen to this bio. Dr. Rowshanak, as she is fondly called, is a credentialed computational and clinical behavioral neuroscientist whose work has literally transformed countless lives all over the world. She is the founder of Access to the Path, and she brings together science, emotional intelligence, and spiritual insights to help people thrive. That's what I love about her the most. She doesn't just look at your brain, she looks at the whole human experience. In this episode, we're going to break down everything and we're going to get some clarity. First of all, what is mental health? And what's the difference between mental health and mental illness? I want to make sure there's no confusion here. What is emotional regulation? This is a big piece that I recently learned. And why does it matter to our lives every day? But most importantly, you're going to walk away with clear tools, strategies, and everyday simple habits you can change. Literally, you can start doing right now. And get this, it will only take you 5 seconds. Watch to the end to get that one. And to begin with, this is going to increase our well-being, our mental health right now, today. And that's where we want to get started. So this episode is going to change the way you see yourself, your mind, and your ability to thrive in your own life. So let's just get started. Dr. Roshanak, welcome to the Human Impact Theory. I'm so excited to have you here today, my friend. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am very excited to be here. I love this show and I love the conversations that you run.
Well, thank you so much. And listen, this is not our first time at the show. You know, you and I have done many shows together in the past. So I'm excited to share with everyone your remarkable knowledge. As I said in the intro, you're probably literally one of the smartest women that I know, but not just smart because you're a neuroscientist, smart because of the in-depth conversations we always get to have to create understanding for people. And that's what I'm excited to get into today. It is, just as a reminder for everyone, Mental Health Month in Canada. Now, here's the really interesting thing, and I got to bring this up, not to bring politics into the show by any means, but we are doing a cross-border show today. So I am Canadian. Dr. Roshanak lives in New York City. She is American. And what her and I know from our friendship, our time working together, is that there are no borders here. It doesn't matter that Dr. Roshanak is American and I am Canadian. I want to really make sure that we all come together with our friends across the border. You know, the Americans are our friends. It doesn't matter what our leaders are saying or doing right now. We're still tied together. And we all live on the same little planet and the same little continent, you know?
See that planet behind me? We're
Exactly.
on the one.
So I just wanted to bring that up because obviously it's in the topic of the news. And I think it's important that we all literally put our hands across the border. So I'm putting my hands across the border right now to Dr. Roshanak, and saying thank you for being with us and allowing this cross border with American and Canadians to keep going. Because as far as I'm concerned, our leaders are going to do what they're going to do, and we can still keep that line of communication open. So thank you so much, my friend, for being
Can
here.
I make a comment about what you just said? Because I think it's
Yes,
really
please.
powerful. So this is Mental Health Month, and we talk about mental health all the time. And it's now in the daily, if not conversation, explicitly, implicitly.
Yeah.
So, and you talked about relationship. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? Is that when we are connected to each other, we're looking for all these different ways to affect and improve our mental health. But the one that's the easiest, the most natural, the most intuitive is to have relationships with each other, is to
Mm.
have nice connection to each other. It's a biological drive also that we have. It's a psychological, it's a spiritual, we've evolved literally as human beings to be affiliative. And
And
when
connected.
we do that, that's it. And so when we do that, guess what? It absolutely supports us, our mental health, our physical health, everything. So being able to reach across a border or across any kind of literal or figurative divide is a very healthy thing to do. Of course, if you have somebody in front of you with a gun, I recommend a different course of action. But by and large, in our day to day lives, reaching out to each other is so simple
And
and so
there's your first step.
powerful.
We haven't even started the show. We've already got your very first and most important, strategy for your mental health is connection with others. And that
Yeah,
can even be in this way. I was saying to somebody this morning, most of my friends are actually not here in Vancouver, but they're all over the world. And I feel so
right.
beautifully connected to them on a regular basis. I may not have the in-person time all the time, but what I know is that they're always there for me to reach out to and connect. So we're
And
gonna
that's
get
the upside,
yeah,
right?
and we're
Of
going to get
our
right into
digital
those.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have so many strategies as we go along because I know as we talk through this conversation today, you're going to hear them as they come, and then we're going to do a review at the end so that everybody walks away from this show today with clear, you can call them tips, tricks, strategies, practices, new habits that you can start implementing into your life literally today. And that's the first one right there. Reach out and connect. Right. And that's where we can start. And that's why we're here so that we can
It's a
connect with all of you
win-win.
today. Exactly. Now, listen, I want to start right from the beginning
Okay.
because so everyone here knows as well. After my initial conversations with Dr. Roshanak, I realized I have three children that all have neurodevelopmental disorders. And I would never put them in the category of mental illness. And I was going, well, but sometimes they struggle with their mental health because of their neuro differences and their disabilities. And then I realized, oh, well, really, if you were to define it properly, they really do have a mental illness because of their neuro differences in their brain. And so there was a bit of confusion for me. And I wanted to start with that conversation of, what's the, first of all, definition of mental health? So we're all straight because there's a lot of chitter chatter all over the place about mental health. Let's talk about what that is. And then we're going to get into what's the difference between mental health and mental illness because they're two quite different things. So let's start at the top. Talk to us about mental health.
So mental health is your lived experience of well-being.
Okay.
It's your psychological, your emotional, your social well-being. It's your ability to manage life daily.
Mm,
It's how do you cope with life's natural stressors, day to day. It's are you able to work productively? It's can you have good healthy relationships? What are your how are your relationships? It's how you're thinking and feeling and acting so that you are fully expressing your abilities, your gifts and your blessings, that you can make good choices.
So if our mental health isn't great, that's when we're feeling, when our stress is running
Mm,
ridiculously high at different points we all have in our life, when we're not really able to cope well, happily, healthily in our day-to-day experience, when we're going to work and we've got no energy, we've got no creativity, we've got no focus and attention. These are all the things that we can look at. And I think we've all been there. It may not be every day, but all of us suffer at one point or another where it all just feels too much. And then we're not in a good state of mental health. Is that correct?
right.
Okay.
So, to suffer the slings and arrows of the world, as it were, we have different stressors all day.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
but stress by itself is not a bad thing. Let me just start
Right.
with that.
Okay.
So the way we use the word stress, we typically mean distress, which
Right.
is putting us into an unhealthy nervous system activation. Most people will just call it fight or flight. It's fight, flight, faint, fawn, or freeze, as it were. If we're getting into that state, those are the responses that we might have. Um, and a little bit of stress is actually good for you, and that's called eustress, EUSTRESS. And eustress actually sort of makes you better, faster, stronger, as it were, right? It can
So
sharpen you.
let's you and I were talking about this just so people understand this because I think sometimes people put stress in this box and it's a one thing.
Right.
That a certain amount of stress, and I actually was just listening to something yesterday about this. You and I were talking about exercise. You've been a remarkably fit human being in your lifetime. I've started doing some hardcore training for myself because of my age right now. And that stress, the additional working out, it's like your muscles, right? You're not going to get stronger if you don't have some stress going on to your muscles in your body to get more fit. And that goes along not
You
only
got to use
with
what you
the
have.
muscles, right, in our body. This can be day to day. This can be our tie into our mental health as well, right? A little bit of stress, we cope better. A little bit of stress, we're coping better. And so we get more resilient, I guess is the word almost I'm looking for.
So I think that's it. There's a little bit of a difference there insofar as automatically becoming resilient or just coping better. I don't think a little bit of stress makes you cope better, although that's probably true. I think that a little bit of stress can um, in, give you the opportunity, give you a chance to use your abilities. And we
Mm.
said already that mental health, part of the definition was using your abilities, right? So a little bit of stress, meaning that you're not dead, that your senses and your brain are getting input, you know, and that input gets responses, gets processed, right? And then the brain decides, what do I do with this? So a little bit of stress actually activates you, and
Mm.
that's good
Perfect.
to a
Right.
point.
Yep.
And for each person, that point is
It's
different.
different.
And I think also, depending upon how stressed you may have already been, that point can change, right?
Yeah.
So we have a window of tolerance, it's called, where stress is okay or good for you. Past that plateau, so it goes like this, right? So if you have um, stress over here, and let's say productivity over here, it will go like this. The more stress you get, the more productive you become, as it were, right? Till you hit a peak. You hit this peak, and then any more stress brings you down the other side. You're less productive, less productive, less productive
Perfect.
until you're
Great.
like not productive at all, right?
So that's a really great. I love that from an awareness perspective that all of everybody that's listening that you can understand, figure out what that is for you, right? Figure out where that stress point is where you just start rolling downhill on the other side and now, you're not as productive, your brain's not working as well, you're not coping as well in day to day, you're going home to your family and it's not good and you're bringing all that home. So that would be a great starting point is how can we all start to notice and be aware every day of okay, where is that snapping point for me, where is that point where it's all downhill from here versus might be exciting, a work project that yes it's stressful but it's engaging and it's creative
Right,
and right
right.
you're like over the top, it's your coordination, all your skills are firing and wiring at your max without hitting that plateau. So I love that. That's a great first start is let's all start that and figure out where our stress point is.
So yeah, where that plateau is, where that you
Right.
hit your peak,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, your breaking point, as it were.
Before you break though, we all got to figure it out, right?
Right? So yeah, so that's let's starting off with that stress
Yeah.
is not all stress is bad.
Great.
And also when we say stress, we typically mean distress. And distress would be that other side as you're coming down the productivity, right?
Great.
So, and different people handle stress differently, and at different times we handle stress differently. And so what we're really talking and focusing on is distress. And our bodies, we are engineered to be able to manage stress and distress. However, the problem arises when it becomes either overwhelming or um, when when you feel like you're stressed and stressed and stressed and in other words, chronic stress. So
Right.
chronic stress is actually, and now the thought is that it's the basis of all disease.
Yeah.
So chronic stress leads to inflammation, which leads to all kinds of problems. And we know that stress also increases everything from your likelihood of getting cancer to having an ulcer to,
Diabetes.
headaches to just all kinds of breakdowns that we notice not just in mental health but in physical health, because our wellness dimensions, the dimensions of wellness, they're very much interconnected. We can silo them out, for a greater focus and understanding, but they don't work in a vacuum. We are not independent in our financial or emotional or social or mental or physical or whatever other level of health and wellness.
I love that you said that because I think that's a key point that people really need to understand is that when we talk about mental health, this isn't just brain based. We know we're talking to a remarkable neuroscientist today, but I say this to my kids all the time that your brain is in your head, it's attached to your whole body. So so all of these stressors, stress is cortisol, that runs through our whole body, right? It's not like cortisol just is in one little secluded area in a box somewhere in our body. The minute we are getting to that point where our stressors
Well,
are
adrenaline and cortisol. Yeah.
right? And that runs through our whole body. So our whole body is affected when we're talking about mental health. It's not just mental, it's our entire body that's engaged with that process. And understanding, when your body is too stressed, where are you feeling it? Because as
Hmm.
much as you may be feeling it as in the form of a headache, you might be feeling it in your gut. You might be feeling it in so many different areas of your body because it will show up and it's like it talks to you almost, right? Like if you actually listen to your body, it'll say, "Hey, there's something going on here." That's
See, and
more
what you're
than
saying
just
sounds, sorry.
it's okay. Just more than mental, right? It's not just mental. I really want to bring that message home to people that it's all interconnected. It's not like separated.
So in other words, it's not just all in your head, is what
Yeah,
you're
it's
saying.
not just all in your head.
Right.
Perfect.
So, and that's patently true.
We're going to write that one down just so you know. We're going to use that one as a quote, right? Your mental health isn't all in your head. I
That's
love
right. And what that means. So many people can think, well, that's woo woo, where is it? Where do you feel it in your body? Do a body scan. And let me just bring the science into this, and that is that your brain, so people say brain body, but your brain is part of your body. So there's that. But it's a central servo that
Right.
runs and processes what's going on in the body.
So when you
So,
say central servo, can you make that correlation? It's almost like your computer, isn't it? It's like we have a
yeah,
central system in our computer,
that's your engine that's running your vehicle.
right? Perfect, right? So without the engine, like your car doesn't run without the engine
That's right.
and all the other parts that attach to it. Like it has to have all the parts. It's not like the engine runs individually by itself. Your car doesn't go without wheels, right? Okay, got it. That's great.
So your brain in your body, and I hate to say brain in your body because, hello. But the brain and the rest of the body are in constant and continual communication. They're in constant and continual communication. So if you press on your finger, you know about that because it goes up into your brain, right? So when you go to the doctor, uh, they might use the mallet and hit your knee to see if you have an intact system that doesn't use the brain. That's why it's called a reflex, because you're not using this, consciousness, this brain in this way. And you want to see if the system that's beneath that is working right. But you don't feel pain, as it were, unless it's going up into your brain, into the pain centers. Yes, you have pain centers in your brain. Surprise, right? So anything
So even though
touch,
your knee hurts, it's not really, yes, your knee hurts, but it's your brain telling you that your knee hurts. It's not your knee telling you you hurt.
so you have like mechanoreceptors. If you touch your finger, there are receptors in your finger that are going to respond to that. Those are also neurons. They're in the peripheral nervous system, not in, well, the receptors, that not in the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, not the bones of the spine, but the spinal cord, right? The rest of all your nerves are your peripheral nervous system, and they are connected to each other, of course. So that you feel this when you're touching, or that you hear things, or that I can see you, or you can see me, we can smell and taste, all of that is getting processed through your brain, right? So when you say, where do you feel it in your body? By the same token that that information is coming up and into the brain from the different sensory organs, it's also information going back out into it.
Right.
So there is a dialogue. There is a dialogue.
Yeah. It's a whole
And so
conversation that's going on in your
that's
body.
exactly right.
Love that. Love
And
that.
so when you are feeling really stressed out, well, first of all, we said, well, you can get an ulcer. Well, the ulcer is not in my brain. It's not in my head. It's not in my mind, right? That's in my body. That's in my stomach. So the scientific medical effects of stress we easily accept: a tumor, a stroke, an ulcer. But when it's a little bit before that or some other manifestation, then we're like, that's woo woo. How does that make any sense? Come on.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yes, it does make sense if you can come into greater aware. Now, here's the trick: greater awareness of what you're feeling and where you're feeling it. Because, and this is one thing that most people will relate to, we mostly feel it in our shoulders, in our neck. We'll
I'm a
get a
stomach.
headache
I'm
because the
all gut.
muscles of
I
our
don't know about
neck.
everybody
That's
else, but
right.
it's like I feel it all in my gut.
Well,
Yeah.
that's because there's a gut brain axis.
Connection. Oh yeah. When
Yeah.
I'm stressed, it's all here for me. My whole everything stops working properly.
Most people, if you give yourselves a minute, even right now as you're watching or listening, just drop your shoulders. Don't you feel different all of a sudden? Because as the day goes on, and this is factual, by and large, we end up like this. Our shoulders start creeping up because that's what happens with the tension. So you're not conscious of your bodily responses
Yeah.
to stressors, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And doing things like a body scan, which sounds really woo woo, right?
Yeah,
Like
but even
sit
that
down,
moment of breathing,
visualizing.
right? I mean, we hear this all the time,
Well, but
right?
that's a little bit different, but yes, also. So then you can start to see where you are feeling things so that that can help you to first of all recognize how stressed you are, because you talked about that earlier, right? Let's see where our windows are.
Yeah.
But how would you gauge that, right? One way to gauge it is your behavior. One way to gauge it is your physical body and your manifestation, for example. So so there's that. But and then going to the breathing, you have a very good point, which is, people will be like, take a breath. And it's like, okay, whatever. No, because actually, when you take a breath through your nose, first of all, through your nose, because that helps you get more oxygenation, but, and then you breathe out longer than you breathed in through physics, through the physical engineering of your body, you slow down your heart rate. That signals your brain. So as soon as your heart rate is connected to your brain, obviously. So you can speed when it speeds up, when it slows down, it's giving your brain information. So when it speeds up, your brain's like, "Ooh, something's going on." And when it slows down, it's like, "Oh, everything's okay. I'm resting. I'm relaxing. I'm safe."
I'm safe. I was just going
So
to say
when
that. I
you
feel safe.
breathe
Yeah.
and you exhale longer than you inhale, you slow down your heart rate. It's a physical thing. And then your brain goes, "Oh, everything must be all right." And you start to calm down.
And that
You see
makes
how
it
that works?
perfect. I love it.
So breathing is a real thing.
Perfect.
And it can be, and it is one of my strategies for assisting with your mental health. So one of the things that you can do, even if you don't know what's going on in your body or whatever's happening, is set aside a certain time, maybe 5 times a day, maybe at lunch, maybe when you're leaving work or quitting, whether leaving work is at home or not, you know, um, and just breathe a little bit to bring yourself into a reset. And remember how we talked about we don't want this gunk building up. We had this conversation offline that as things go in life, it's like if you don't clean, this gunk builds up and it's a lot harder to get through it and to clean it,
I
right?
kept getting this image of my coffee cup, right? And you don't clean your coffee cup day after day. It just gets like that black gunk on the inside and the buildup. And I thought, yeah, if you didn't wash your coffee cup out for a week, what's happening? And I loved that analogy that you gave that it's like, well, if we're not doing that check-in, if we're not doing that reset, if we're not cleaning out the junk that we're holding in our body, then it just keeps building up and building up. And then
Exactly.
you would use this beautiful analogy that your cup gets so full of all this gunk, then it just tips over. And that's when we lose it, right? We all have those moments and we lose it, whether it's tears that we can't get out of, it's anxiety, we can't move out of our bed, it's anger and we're explosive. We had used the example. It's like, well, somebody cuts you off in your car. well, is that really a big deal? But yet you have a complete and total explosion at this person you don't even know in front of you because they got a little too close, right? And
Yeah.
your cup is overflowed, not in a good
So,
way.
so first of all, gunk. What made me think about that was the other day I was at someone's house and I was cleaning up dishes or whatever, and I pulled out the drain, and the bottom of the drain, the little thing
Yep.
in the drain, and I pulled it out, and there was it was like black. It was black, and I thought, is that the rubber from this thing? Turned out to be grossness. It was gunk. It was just like gunk from like not having been cleaned.
Right.
Because think about it. You put things down the drain and down the drain and down the drain, and you're just like, it magically goes away. You're
Because you
not
don't see
thinking,
it,
yeah, that
right?
stuff sticks. Stuff sticks. And if you're not cleaning, more stuff will stick to the stuff that already stuck. And the next thing you know, you are stuck with all this gunk.
Right. And
This
it's
is
like
what I was
emotional gunk
thinking.
and stress gunk and life
That's exactly
gunk
right.
and
That's exactly right.
right, scrolling
And
through your
so
phone gunk, like whatever it is, that's been going on in your world. Yeah, that makes
so it's
such
not
sense. That's
gunk
so good.
until it's really like you don't notice it, in other words, until you've neglected it for too long and now you're like, "Oh, well, I have to do something about
Yeah.
this."
Because
Because
now you're
it's
no longer functioning.
and it's also how you can get stuck,
Yeah.
right? And it takes a lot longer and it's a lot harder to get through it.
Yeah.
We know this. Now, as your cup fills up and fills up and fills up, it's moving from the gunk to the let's say coffee or water, your cup, then we know a full cup, you put another drop, then it's going to spill over. We see that, we know that it's not just intuitive, it's physics.
Yeah.
Um, Getting caught off in traffic and being like angry about it, that's not unnatural. Anger is hardwired in the brain, and you can have a flash of anger, literally just 2 seconds. But after that, now we're talking about the gunk and the full cup and because what you do with your anger, how long you hold on to it, not the brain processing it, because that's really fast, is dependent upon behaviors that you have chosen, repeated, and how full as it is you already are in order to be able to regulate yourself. So there is number one, this idea of emotional regulation and being able to regulate yourself and your behavior,
We're gonna get
your
there.
state
We're
of
gonna get
being.
there.
I'm going to get there, and that state of being.
Yeah.
But there's also the expression. So one is the internal regulation, and the second is the external expression, which is the behavior that we see, the actions that we take,
Yeah.
as it were.
Beautiful. Okay,
Right?
and we're going to get into emotional regulation because I think those two words are so important. And I'll be honest, I didn't know about emotional regulation until my kids are actually, I told you this, my kids are actually diagnosed with their neural differences because their emotional regulation, it was so volatile all of the time because they actually didn't have the ability to regulate. And so I had to learn all about this. And I want everybody here to understand what emotional regulation is. And I don't think we talk about it enough in mental health to create an understanding. So we're going to get there next. But before we move on to that, I just wanted to talk about the difference between mental health, which we've now really
Right.
defined. And this is our state of well being and how we are in our lives and our world every day. We talked about many things in that. Our awareness is a big one, checking in with our body and how that's responding to us, and then our behavior and how that's actually coming out in us, in both positive and negative ways. But we can use all these three things as these tools to kind of check in every day so that, as you said, the gunk doesn't get all layered up and stuck and turn into mold. And then, you know, just the buildup is so horrific that the cleaning job takes longer than it ever took to actually
Right,
get the
right,
gunk
right,
all
right,
cleared
right.
out. So, and we're going to talk about those tools and strategies a little bit later in the show, just of how we can start clearing that gunk every day so the buildup doesn't actually start. So, we're going to get there with that. The first one was, and let's not miss this. We talked about the breathing, which was number one, which was a really important one,
It was number two.
and
Relationship was
recognizing
number
that
one.
mental health is not in our head. I loved that. It's like, if we used to tweet, that's what Oprah would say. That's a tweetable moment. Okay, so let's not, we don't have to use a tweetable moment, but let's remember that when it's not stuck in our head.
It's really important for everyone to really get that, because otherwise it becomes so intractable and you can't grasp it. And so it lends itself to misunderstanding in
Exactly.
both
Yeah.
directions, and
And that's why we're here
us
today. We really
misunderstanding
want to
ourselves and
create.
others misunderstanding
Yeah.
us and each other and so on. Yeah.
Right. And isn't that half of the human experience is just misunderstanding each other, right? So,
That's
okay,
true.
so let's talk about mental
Yeah.
illness. The Today Show's not about mental illness, but I did want to make sure people were distinguishing the difference between the two. So, what
So
can you
mental,
briefly tell us just about the difference between the two?
so mental health, okay. Mental health, as we said, is your lived experience. Your how are you experiencing your well-being in your day-to-day life? And actually, um, the National Institutes of Mental Health and so on, they have something that is called um, AMI and then SMI. And AMI is a sort of all mental illness, any mental illness. That includes basically from nothing to severe mental illness.
So, can you give us just a few examples of what
Yeah,
would
I'm going
be
to go into that.
categorized? Okay.
Yeah, and so and I think that this is a bit problematic for us because as we keep talking about mental health, mental health, mental health, and it's important to understand, but to not get weighed down and bogged down at every little thing, at every little stressor that we encounter. You will have challenges, and that's okay. That's good. That, as you said, resilience can build resilience, can give you opportunity for adaptability. Mental health in the daily way that we would be expressing it would be, how are you managing your challenges? How are you managing the stressors? It's a change in, hormones and neurotransmitters, and then they come back. You come back online, right? You feel something and you're able to manage it. And so serious so that's that any mental illness would contain all of this sort of normal mental, behavioral, emotional um impact, right? From like nothing to mild, moderate, and then severe. But when we talk about mental illness, we're talking about really severe, right? We're talking about a substantial functional disability and an impairment that affects your ability to, as we said with mental health, work productively, have good relationships. Um, um,
Regulate our emotions. Would that fall into that too?
yes, absolutely. To be able to express your abilities.
Mhm.
And so if it's affecting one or more major life activities, then you're talking about mental illness, the way we talk about it colloquially,
Yeah.
which is serious mental illness, um, according to the more formal definition. And the prevalences of the two are very different. So there was a 2022 study done in the US, and 23%, I believe it was, of adults, which is like 59 point something million people in the US, are suffering from this any mental illness. So that it's 1 in 5, basically. And that is profound. You're like, oh my God, we all have mental illness, but you don't, because of this way that they've now defined it as any mental illness, which also means absolutely nothing to like somebody cut me off in traffic and I was dysregulated for a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
To bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, um, narcissistic personality disorder, any of these, obsessive compulsive disorder, um, Gilles de la Tourette syndrome, any of these um, conditions that are really debilitating, that can really interfere with life. So if you then break it down to severe mental illness and just the everyday mental healthiness, then you find a very different statistic.
Right.
So for serious mental illness, the one that we call mental illness colloquially, it's a much smaller percentage. It's 6% of people, of
Okay. Very
adults,
small. Yeah.
much smaller. So see that difference? That's how
Yeah.
if we're not paying attention, it's the meme and the one-off and the social media, and somebody just says something because they read a Google article. No, no. And that messes us up.
Yeah.
So when we believe something, our beliefs are very important to our behaviors. then we can, then that's very powerful for how we live our daily lives. But now, if you know the truth, that of the 23%, as it were, 23.1%, 23 something percent, then only 6% is mental illness, which
Very
is that
small. Okay.
functional impairment, right? That
Yeah.
is interfering with your daily life.
Yeah. And I
And
love
by the
that you
way,
made that clear for people that they're so distinctly different and it's, these are brain-based disabilities and
right, they're organic, they
yeah.
can be genetic,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Right.
Or epigenetic.
Yes.
Autism, for example, if you're on the autism spectrum,
This,
uh,
yeah.
disorder,
Yeah.
ASD. So it really makes a big difference, because also, how would you manage it? How do you treat it? How do you respond to it? If I
And
go, oh my God, I have a mental illness,
yeah.
it's going to be very different than having a bad day.
You're not just going to breathe, right? That's not just
Exactly. All the breathing in the
not
world is
just a
not going to
breath
change over
away that
two
you're
days.
feeling better, right? Take and I can account for that. My kids have something called fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and it's never just a breath away, right? It's far more complicated than that.
That's
Um,
exactly right. That's
yeah.
exactly right. And another important, I think, piece of this statistic is two things are pretty consistent across the mental health concerns or issues or topic, and the mental illness or mental health disorders, as we call them. And that is that there is a greater prevalence of women who suffer from these
That's
than
interesting.
females than males in both cases. And also that depending upon your age bracket, that if you are in the 18 to 25, you have the highest incidence compared to if you're in the 50 and older.
Wow, that's interesting.
So whether it's just how are you managing your day-to-day mental health, or how are you doing with
Great. Well, thank
your
you
mental.
for helping everyone understand that. And let's do the disclaimer as well. We're not here today by any means giving mental,
No, not at
illness
all.
advice. If you feel you're at a point in your own life where you just can no longer cope without support, go get that support. Find that
And
support
the
and
younger people are the least likely to get the support, by the way.
right. Yeah,
So I'd like to
exactly.
really bring that out,
Yeah.
that your prevalence of serious mental illness is the highest, and your likeliness of seeking help is the lowest.
Is the lowest. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
This is
and
a problem.
let's move in. We're going to move into emotional regulation, but I do want to talk about this. I think it's a kind of a good segue into the fact that, you and I have talked about this before, but we've heard this before is that, mental health is really looked at right now as a world pandemic in its own right. What does that mean to you, and
Well, that's the one
why
in
are we
five.
even hearing that?
That's the one in five, right? But also, we are seeing more. So there was a question about, are more people reporting it, or do we just really have more?
Yeah.
And the answer is, we just really have more.
Hmm.
And when you look at the chemicals that we are exposed to, the plastic, we're eating the equivalent of a credit card a week.
These
Your
are the
body was not.
toxins that we're physically ingesting into our body.
So we are getting it from both sides. On the one hand, we have real physical challenges because of these toxins,
Yeah.
which didn't exist before, the PFAS, etc. And then on the other hand, we have a world on fire. And so, from the tangible and the intangible, from the physical assault to the mental, emotional, social assault, we are really, I mean, it's a testament to how incredible this feat of engineering this body is, and this brain that runs it, that we're standing it all. So let's
And for as
everybody give
long
her.
as we do now, we're living so much longer, right? We've doubled the age that we actually now live on average, And I want to go back to that point you made right at the beginning and about the importance of connection. It
But
used
I
to
just want to
be
say
that a
one thing.
village would,
Wait.
right?
One thing. You said we're living longer. True, by and large, depending upon when you're comparing it to, but yes. But what is our quality of life? Because that is what connects to mental health,
Right.
the
Yes.
importance of mental health.
Yeah,
I just really didn't want that to get glossed over. The
absolutely.
importance of mental health connects not to the technology of how long are we living, but how well are we living?
Yeah. But let's talk about emotional regulation. What is emotional regulation? Please explain this to us.
So you've heard of emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
and emotional regulation is fundamental to emotional intelligence because with emotional regulation, what you're doing is you are recognizing your emotions and then you're managing them. In other words, instead of being reactive, you're responsive.
Mm.
You're able to regulate, manage your emotions. It's that simple. And the problem is emotional dysregulation. And it's a very common thing. Everybody's experiencing it at some time or another, and more often than once, let's be honest. And so, emotional dysregulation is what I like to also refer to as emotional hijack, right? So, how how we recognize, and that also connects to the body scanning, right? How we recognize our emotions, because you can actually, there are scientific studies that show how different emotions literally are in the body. Different parts of your
Yeah.
body will
Yeah.
be warmer or colder, etc.
Yeah.
There's a real physical expression of this that I can show you in scientific papers. So recognizing that, expressing, how are you expressing what is happening to you and how you feel, and how are you managing it? And things happen to us. Remember the slings and arrows? Whether to suffer the slings and arrows. So things happen, i.e., challenges, i.e., things that affect us. And so when something affects you, what is your emotional response?
Yeah.
And if you're able to respond, then chances are you're doing well with emotional regulation. But if you are reactive, then chances are you're emotionally dysregulated,
So let's
right?
talk about some of those reactive
Right.
emotions. Can we
So
just
it,
name some of those?
so emotional dysregulation will show up as the intensity of an emotional response.
Yeah.
Like somebody cuts you off, that's a small stressor. Do you have a huge response to it? What's the intensity of your response? If something happens, are you going into this like tremendous fear? Do you have, you know, unrecognizable anxiety or
Mm.
anger?
Yeah. That's a great
What
one,
is the intensity
anxiety.
of the emotion relative to the intensity of the stressor? If there's a small stressor and a big response,
Yeah.
you're dysregulated, right?
Yep.
It's
Absolutely.
a heightened response.
Yeah.
So there are two things. One, you have a heightened response, that's the intensity of the emotion, and it lasts longer. So if somebody cuts me off and I'm like, ah, come on, and then I'm over it.
Yeah.
Okay. But if I'm like screaming and cursing for 15 minutes, right?
And
That's a
you're
longer
carrying that
lasting
through your
response.
day, right? You've now
Right.
stayed heightened and you're not
Right.
able to come back down.
Right.
This is
And
going to sound like
wait,
a,
wait.
yeah.
You said come back down, and that's really good because part of this dysregulation is you don't self-soothe.
Mm, right.
That's a really important thing. So, what are your coping strategies?
Yeah.
How do you get to dial down distress?
I'm getting this, and I want to see if I'm right on this one. And just for everybody else, this might help us a little bit. I'm getting this kind of almost an image of like a seesaw, right? Where you're dysregulated and you've got your two kids on a seesaw and you're dysregulated and you're going way up on one side. And then it's how are you starting to balance out where you're just balanced in the other way? And then you're also
Mm.
able to get back your good emotions, like your positive emotions, your happiness, your calm, your peace, right? And so that's what I'm thinking. Because honestly, I felt like these some days where you're just on this seesaw all the time, where we know it's like 1 minute you're screaming at your kids, and then things calm down a little bit, and then somebody calls your best friend who we haven't talked to in 6 weeks, and you're so happy, and things are balanced out again. And so it's this kind of seesaw that we tend to go
Well,
on.
because there are different neurotransmitters and hormones at work,
Beautiful.
right?
Yeah.
So your seesaw when you're going down is this flooding of these neurotransmitters and hormones, adrenaline and cortisol and so on. And your body responds to that, right? Because that's what hormones and neurotransmitters do. They cause responses in the body. But then when you connect, like the first thing we said about friendship relationships, then what do you get when you're talking to a friend? You get another set of hormones and neurotransmitters that are released. And those are the ones that induce the states that we call pleasant or positive.
Love it.
So they can counteract those that we call unpleasant or negative.
Right. When we're dysregulated and then we find our
Right.
regulation. And, I love that example too, that it's, I want everybody, and this is the awareness piece that we talking about right from the beginning, right? When we start to become aware of this, whether you want to call it a roller coaster, a seesaw, whatever it is for you, I want you to get that image in your head that you start to recognize these states that you're in and then the things that help you get that regulation. So if you've noticed that you're on the
Yes.
far end of the seesaw and you are dysregulated, and that's where we're going to move to next, because there's tools and strategies that we can use in our life every day to stay. I'm not going to say you're never going to get dysregulated, but how can
Well,
we
it's
start to manage
unnatural
that?
to not have a response.
Right.
I really want to bring this forth because in the conversation about mental health or just wellness and well-being, it's it's not woo-woo. It's not
Right.
intractable. It's not sanitized. You have a vehicle that works in a certain way. You have a machine. It is made of organic matter and you call it body, right? Just like there's another one that's made of metal and you call it car or aluminum or carbon and you call it bicycle or whatever, right? So, and it's meant to work a certain way. It's engineered.
Yeah.
And so when something that is threatening happens, depending upon, what your level of threat alert is,
Yeah.
then your body is going to show a response. It has to, it should. That's what protects you when you are in real mortal danger, for example,
Right. When a bear is chasing you, you want to be able to run. You don't want
or
to
a
sit there
human.
and, have circle time with, the bear. You want to be able to run. And that's a really neat tie-in. And I'm going to go back to what we were talking about before, where we were saying, figure out where that stress, where that peak is. When you start to understand this is where the emotional regulation can come in too, because when you know where your peak stressor is out, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, then oh, I'm getting to that point of dysregulation, right? That's your point where it's going too far and you need to just bring yourself back down at least a little bit so that you're still functioning well, you're being creative at work, your brain doesn't stop working for you. You're still staying more of a peak good stress amount versus the over the top. And this is where we get dysregulated when you've gone that over the top. Am I
So,
right?
so it's this understanding that you have a physiology, and that's the engineering of your body, right? And when challenges or we call them stimuli, things that happen to you internally or externally, you're not dead. You're going to have a response. That's normal and healthy. That's fine. When it becomes disproportionate,
Mm,
then you start to pay attention. What's going on with me?
yeah. Great.
And we feel it in our bodies. We know it because even if we can't articulate it, if we can't, express it verbally, we know it, we feel it because we have something known as interoception. That's you being aware of the internal state of your body,
Mm,
right? And we develop it around the age of like preteens. Anyway, so if you expect to always be in this yay, rah, rah, rah state, you're going to have a problem. And the problem is that your expectation of how you should be and how you actually are being is going to be at odds. There's going to be a discrepancy. And so you're going to be continually working against nature, which is a losing battle,
right.
right?
It's like
And
saying a thunderstorm's never going to come along or a windstorm
right.
or right. Yeah.
So it's like whenever it rains, you go, well, that's wrong. It should never rain. Oh my God.
Right.
Right? That's just that is unnatural. That
Right.
doesn't make sense. And you probably laugh at that. But that's what we're kind of doing.
Yeah.
And it's because we're hearing ridiculous things and taking them to heart. They're bits and pieces of information. There's this thing about how a little bit of information is a lot of dangerous. So,
Perfect.
so that seesaw is normal to some extent. So again, it's within a certain window. What's your window,
Yeah.
right? Within certain parameters, of course, something happens, you're going to have a response. And then you're going to be able to counter that, or your body will naturally counter that, or a friend will call, um, fate, fortune, God, whatever will come and it will balance out. And then you go the other way. Now, the thing is that we want to pay attention to is what is baseline, quote unquote, normal,
Yeah.
and what is your window of tolerance. Does it require you to take some action? So the first step is the knowledge, and the second step is the understanding and awareness of it. And the third step is, do I require action, and what is that action?
Yeah. And let's move into that action. Let's move into give us before we go today, give us those what are our hacks, our tips, our tools. What are some of the ways we talked about a couple, obviously connection and just taking that moment to breathe, to be aware of what's going on with us in that moment. Where are our emotions in that moment of time? Are we regulated? Are we not regulated? But what can we do to get all this regulated so that just life isn't so overwhelming? Because right now it can feel a lot like that, especially if you're
Yeah.
scrolling your Instagram feed or news reels or anything else. How can we keep our mental health every day that we're doing? We call it doing the work, but this is our mental health work that we got to do that cleaning. Can't leave your dishwasher sitting there for a week and not expect the mold to happen. So, what are the practices? And I always say this, I have my practices I do every single day, almost without fail, that keep me, I call it, they literally keep me sane, right? Keep
It's like the
me
housekeeping, it's your mental housekeeping.
completely. Our mental health housekeeping. I love it.
So I think the first step is what I just said about the awareness and the knowledge and so on. I think that there are many strategies and techniques that can support our housekeeping, as it were. One of them, and the easy one, as we said, is breath work, right? Being able to um, calm down your nervous system if it's in a higher state of activation. You have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic, we say, is fight or flight. The parasympathetic, we call it rest and digest. And I like to say it's the gas and the brakes. And so when you take a deep breath, you, as I said, if the exhale is longer than the inhale, but also just breathing at all, singing, humming, gargling, they
Ooh,
all
gargling.
activate the vagus nerve, which connects is activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is putting on the brakes. So if
So,
you're
like, I
having a
could get a
hard
mouthful
time,
of water or my mouthwash and I could
right?
gargle, and that's going to help.
That's right,
I
absolutely,
love
because it's
that.
activating your vagus nerve.
Oh, I haven't heard that one before. That's
I
good.
know. Well, that's why you come to me.
Exactly.
So go and gargle
Go
or
gargle.
hum or sing,
Fresh breath
right?
and mental health all in the same.
That's exactly
I
right.
love
I
it.
mean, we're doing a two for these days. You just got to double up on things,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Maximize our moments of time.
So yeah, so those things that will activate the vagus nerve will activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and then
Great.
we'll,
I love
we'll
it. Okay. So those are three things that we can do. And, I want people to
but they
realize
all go
too.
together.
No, we don't do them all. No, you're not going to
No, my
gargle,
point is that
breathe.
they're all parasympathetic nervous system. They're addressing that.
Yeah.
There
Now,
are other things that you can do
okay,
that
now
don't
I'm just going to ask you too, is this going to be different for different moments of time and different days and different people? Like, is gargling always going to work or?
always this is physiology.
Okay, so
This is
these
this
three
is
things
your
are our
leveraging your
physiology that,
body engineering.
okay,
You're leveraging your body's
great.
engineering to bring yourself into better regulation,
I love
into a
that.
better
Okay,
state.
so this is how we're using our bodies to literally give us our regulation and our better
So
mental.
if you want to get into a better state,
That's it.
right?
Those are our three
This
things.
this you got to know how your machine works.
Perfect.
And so
Perfect. And
this is how your machine works.
And I want people, I know a lot of people say, and I've been one of those people, I can't meditate. I can't sit myself down. I can't turn my brain off. Like, and I want to go back to that. Even the breathing ones, there are apps, and I use a particular app for my meditation, and for my breath work as well, where you can literally go and get like a 3 minute
Absolutely.
breath work. You could go onto YouTube and they'll have
You
a
don't even
three
need three
minute,
minutes.
right?
I can give you 3 seconds to bring yourself into a better state.
And it'll be there for you.
It's
So,
called the physiological sigh.
I love that.
It's taking in a really deep breath, big belly breath, and then take another quick one over it. And then, and when you blow it out like that, what you're doing is you're offloading CO2, carbon dioxide, and dropping your cortisol.
Oh, there you go. That's it right there. So
And you
even if
see
you
kids do
like,
it. You have kids. You see kids do it when they go, like
yeah,
that. They're
yeah.
calming themselves down.
Oh, love that. There you go. So that's our three
You can do that
second
anywhere at any
right
time.
there. Love that. Now, if you were going to add any other bigger,
Cognitive reframing. I think that's a big one.
okay,
So, for
great.
example, we talked about the car, right?
Yeah.
So, in the case of the car and I'm being cut off, what I can do instead of being angry at this guy and da 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 da, I can reframe that as, oh, they have an emergency. They're in a rush. Everybody can understand, you're taking someone to the hospital or whatever. And the thing is to believe that. Now, that happened to me. I had somebody in the back seat. They were lying down. They were in atrial fibrillation, and I was rushing them to the hospital. For all the world, it looked like I was driving by myself, and who is this nut job, driving the way I was driving? But I had somebody who's literally, in the backseat with atrial fibrillation. They're having problems with their heart, and I'm going to the emergency room. Now, you wouldn't think that. You'd be like, this girl's whatever. But the truth was, if you had believed that I had some emergency, something that was urgent, you'd be right.
And you'd be
So
coming from a place of grace and
yeah, you
understanding,
don't know
and
what's going on with other people.
you don't
They may
in
not
any
have been
way.
paying attention. Their mind may be
Ugh.
whatever.
They're coming
All
right
I'm
from
saying
work,
is
they're stressed, they're late for work. I
you
mean,
can
how
be
many of
giving
us have
people
driven like a
grace,
maniac when we're late for an appointment, right?
right? And when you give others grace, you're also giving yourself grace. And
You're
when you give
giving,
yourself grace, you give others grace. But
yes.
and that's amazing and important. But
Yeah.
the cognitive reframing is really challenging your automatic thoughts.
Yeah. What's
This is important also for things like imposter syndrome, where you have this cognitive distortion of it wasn't me, it was the timing, or it was this, and no, you need to reframe so you remove that distortion. Cognitive reframing is relevant for all kinds of things because what you're doing is you're replacing this disproportionate, inaccurate response or thought with something that is more balanced and truthful.
yeah. And that
It's a
takes
switching of your perspective. Think of it that way.
exactly, right. And listen, that takes time and that takes practice because what we know
Yes.
is that this beautiful, mind of ours, it's there to serve and protect us and,
Yes.
make sure that the world is not treating us badly. So it's going to find every reason why that guy driving or person driving, was just an idiot versus he had something going on in his life. Our brain
Well,
always
I
says
mean, but
that. It's
just
like our
think about
default
that though.
system.
If you say they're just an idiot, I mean, what do you expect then?
Yeah, you know how you're going to feel when you say that to yourself. And the only person you're saying it to, hopefully, is yourself,
Yeah.
right? But we know, and this is, I catch myself all the time. It's like, what's the replay going on in my head all of the time? And so we have to practice changing that. And that's literally most days, I know for me, a moment by moment experience where it's like, no, 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 no. This is not helping me. It's not serving me. And I think that's the reframe I've taken is having these thoughts is no longer serving my own happiness because it's
Right.
just making me unhappier. And that's not the life that I want to choose for
Right.
myself. I want to have a moment of happiness. So
And
instead
when
of
you're
looking,
unhappy, you're going to
yeah,
make other people unhappy.
and that spreads, right? And that's the ripple effect. We talk about we've got
Right.
a whole shows on the ripple effect here.
Right.
And the ripple effect goes both ways for happiness and unhappiness. If you're unhappy, it affects everybody around you. And if you're a
Right.
little happier, that also affects everybody around
Right.
you as well,
Right.
right? When our mental health is in a good state and we're working on increasing it, if we're in a state that's not so great, then that affects everybody around us. And, I'm going to come back to the 365 give, and we haven't had a show on this yet, but one day we will, is, the happier you are, the more ability you have to give to everyone around you. Right. And that's a big one. And
Because
when
you
I
can
say
only
give
give
to
what you
everyone
have.
around you, it's even your children and your partner and at work is that you're not feeling like you're just being stripped every day of everything. Instead, you have that cup overflowing and so much more to give to everyone.
And
So,
what else is very helpful for that? Moving. We become very sedentary.
oof, right.
And when you move, when you exercise, you change your hormones, you change your stress hormone, you release endorphins.
And that could be as
You
simple as walk. Like people get stuck on
Yes,
exercise, and we know that.
yes.
And not everybody's a
That's
maniac
why I
like
said
you and I
moving.
are. Yeah. Just move. So that could be walking. That could be like on your lunch break, go for a 10-minute walk, and that will make a difference. Right. So it doesn't, listen, even for me, you can all see I've got stairs behind me. Some days, if I haven't got a lot of time, I'll just go up and down the stairs a couple times
Yeah,
just to get my body moving because I know I'm sitting here. We've been sitting here for almost an hour now, and it's like, okay, it's time.
time to get up.
So, well, Dr. Roshanak, thank you so much. I know you and I could sit here and talk about this topic, and we have for
Great
literally
topic.
hours. And it doesn't mean it's the end of this conversation by any means. It just means we need to have some more. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your brilliance with our audience. Dr. Roshanak, and if you heard in our intro, sits on the board of advisors for 365 Give. She's such a godsend just to help us understand all of how giving and happiness and love and stress and our mental health, this all affects all of our lives. And what we wanted to bring to all of you today was just how we do have some control over that. And we can use the tools and the tricks and the tips. And we can use all of those every day to really have a life that we get to create and a life that we love. Maybe not every minute, but we do have some control over that. So thank you so much for being with us. I
Thank
love
you
you,
for
my
having me.
friend.
It's such a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
And we'll look forward to seeing everyone soon. Please remember, don't forget, click on subscribe below, like this, share this with friends. This not only helps everyone that you touch, but it helps 365 Give. And we are a not for profit charitable organization, and your support is appreciated. So we wish you all a beautiful, wonderful, happy day, and namaste.